It was supposed to be just another Friday night. She had spent the whole week locked inside her apartment, surrounded by half-finished paintings and empty coffee mugs. The city outside was alive with sounds of laughter and music, but she had ignored it all. She told herself she was too busy, too tired, too focused on her work. But that evening, something inside her wanted to breathe again. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror by her door. Her long hair was tied back loosely, her makeup light, her eyes a little tired but curious. She didn't plan to impress anyone. She just wanted to feel like a part of the world again. Her friends had promised to meet her, but one by one they canceled. One had a sudden shift at work, another wasn't feeling well, and the third just didn't answer her messages. She stood there for a moment, phone in hand, debating whether to still go. It would be strange to walk into a club alone. But something told her to do it anyway. Maybe she just wanted to prove to herself that she could. She slipped into her black dress, simple but elegant, and grabbed a small purse. The night air was warm as she stepped outside, the streets glowing with lights from restaurants and passing cars. She walked toward the heart of Naples, where the music was loudest. The club her friends had picked wasn't just any place. It was Club Nero, a name people said with both excitement and caution. It was beautiful, exclusive, and known for attracting powerful men and dangerous secrets. She had heard rumors about it, how the owner was someone nobody wanted to cross, how people who disrespected him seemed to disappear. But she didn't believe in those kinds of stories. They sounded like things people said to make the city sound more mysterious. She wasn't going there for trouble. She just wanted a drink, some music, and maybe to feel alive for a few hours. As she approached the entrance, the line outside made her hesitate. Everyone looked like they belonged there, confident, glamorous, a little arrogant. The men wore tailored suits. The women looked like they had stepped out of magazines. She almost turned back, but the security guard at the door looked at her, then gave a small nod. He opened the velvet rope and let her through without a word. She didn't understand why, but she smiled politely and stepped inside. The first thing that hit her was the sound, the bass so deep she could feel it in her chest. The lights were dim, gold and red reflections moving like fire across the walls. The smell of expensive perfume and cigarette smoke filled the air. Every table seemed occupied, every laugh rehearsed. She made her way to the bar, pretending to be relaxed. The bartender, a tall man with sharp eyes, leaned forward with a polite smile. "What will it be?" he asked over the noise. "Just a glass of wine," she replied, her voice almost lost in the music. He nodded and poured her a drink. She took a small sip and turned around, watching the crowd. It was a world that didn't seem real. People whispering secrets, others laughing too loudly, some just staring at nothing, lost in their own thoughts. She noticed how everyone seemed to be connected somehow, as if they all knew something she didn't. She didn't realize that someone was watching her. At a corner table, behind a layer of shadows, sat a man who didn't blend in like the rest. He didn't dance, didn't laugh, didn't drink much. He was simply there, present in a way that drew attention without him even trying. His name was Luca Moretti, though she wouldn't learn that until much later. To the outside world, he was a successful businessman. To those who really knew, he was something else entirely. The quiet force behind most of the city's power, the man whose word carried more weight than any law. When his gaze landed on her, he stopped talking. His companions noticed immediately. They followed his eyes toward the bar. "She's new," one of them said quietly. Luca didn't respond. He just watched her, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the way her eyes moved around the room, uncertain but brave. She didn't belong there, and that was exactly what made her stand out. "Who is she?" another man asked, trying to sound casual. Luca's voice was calm but final. "She's mine now." The words were simple, but the tone left no space for argument. His men exchanged glances, unsure whether he was serious or just intrigued. But Luca never said things he didn't mean. When he wanted something or someone, he got it. At the bar, she felt the sudden shift in energy, though she didn't know why. The crowd around her seemed to part slightly, as if making space for something or someone important. She turned, and that's when she saw him. For a second, their eyes met across the room. It wasn't the kind of look that came with a smile or a flirt. It was a steady gaze, deep and unreadable. She didn't know who he was, but she felt a strange pull, like gravity had changed direction and was now centered on him. She looked away quickly, her cheeks warm. She tried to focus on her drink, telling herself not to be ridiculous. He was just another man sitting in a fancy club, but something about him didn't fit the picture. His presence felt heavier, the kind that made other men step aside without knowing why. Minutes passed. She checked her phone, pretending to read messages that weren't there. When she finally looked up again, the bartender leaned closer and said quietly, "The gentleman over there would like to buy your drink." She followed his gesture toward the corner. It was him, the man with the unreadable eyes. She hesitated. It wasn't the first time someone had offered to buy her a drink, but this felt different. There was no playful smile, no charm, no small talk. Just a silent offer, like an order softly spoken. She shook her head politely. "Please tell him thank you, but no," she said. The bartender gave a short nod, but before he could turn, another man appeared beside her. Tall, well-dressed, clearly one of Luca's men. "Miss, my boss would like to meet you," he said politely, his tone respectful but firm. Her first instinct was to refuse. "That's very kind, but I'm fine here," she said. The man didn't argue. "He insists. Just for a moment," he replied, as if the conversation was already settled. She looked again toward the corner. Luca was still sitting there, his gaze calm, almost patient. Against her better judgment, she nodded. The man led her through the crowd, and people seemed to step aside naturally, as though following an invisible rule. When she reached the table, Luca stood up. He wasn't as old as she had imagined, maybe mid-30s, tall, with dark eyes that seemed to hold both warmth and danger. He extended his hand. "You shouldn't drink alone in this place," he said, in a voice that was smooth but carried authority. She shook his hand, her fingers cold against his. "I didn't plan to. My friends canceled. That's unfortunate for them," he replied with a faint smile. "Sit. Have a drink with me instead." There was something in his tone that made refusal almost impossible. She sat, unsure what to say next. The music seemed to fade around them, leaving only the low hum of conversation and the faint clinking of glasses. He asked her simple questions. Where she was from, what she did, if she liked the city. His words were polite, his interest genuine, but there was something else beneath it. She felt like he was studying her, memorizing every expression. When she finished her wine, he signaled to the bartender without even looking. Another glass appeared. "I should go," she said finally, standing up. He didn't stop her. "I'll have someone take you home," he said calmly. "That's not necessary." "It's late," he replied, his voice low, "and this city isn't kind to people who walk alone." Something in his tone made her heart beat faster. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning, maybe even concern. She hesitated, then nodded slightly. Outside, a black car was already waiting. The man who had approached her earlier opened the door. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. The city lights blurred past the window as the car moved quietly through the streets. When they reached her apartment, the driver handed her a small card. "From Mr. Moretti," he said. She looked down. It wasn't a business card, just a single line written in elegant handwriting. "You looked beautiful tonight. Don't walk alone again." She stood there in the silence of her street, the night suddenly feeling different. Colder, sharper. She didn't know what she had stepped into. All she knew was that from the moment she walked into that club, someone had decided her life would never be the same again. And somewhere, in the heart of Naples, Luca Moretti sat in his dark office, replaying that moment when she first walked in, alone, unaware, and already his. She couldn't stop thinking about that night. The card sat on her kitchen table, untouched but impossible to ignore. Every time she walked past it, her eyes found the handwriting, clean, elegant, and a little unsettling. "You looked beautiful tonight. Don't walk alone again." It wasn't a threat, but it wasn't exactly kind either. It felt like a command disguised as concern. She had read it so many times that she could almost hear his voice saying it. For the next few days, she tried to push the memory away. She threw herself into her work, painting until late at night, trying to lose herself in colors and shapes, but her focus slipped. Her mind kept drifting back to the club, the lights, the music, the way everyone seemed to move around him. And him, most of all. That calm face, those dark eyes that looked right through her. She didn't know why he had noticed her. She wasn't special. Just an ordinary girl who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe she thought the right place. She hated that she wasn't sure which one it was. A few evenings later, As she walked home from a late class, she noticed a black car parked across the street from her apartment building. It wasn't unusual, this was the city after all, but something about it made her slow down. The windows were tinted, the engine off, but she could feel eyes on her. When she looked again, the car drove away slowly, disappearing around the corner. She told herself not to overthink it. Maybe it was just her imagination. But deep down, she already knew. The next day, she found flowers outside her door. White lilies wrapped neatly in silver paper. No name, no message, just the same kind of handwriting on a small folded note. For your studio. Keep creating. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it. He knew where she lived. Of course he did. A man like that could find anyone. She placed the flowers in a vase on her windowsill, unsure whether to feel grateful or nervous. They were beautiful, soft, and fragrant, but they also carried a strange weight, like a reminder that someone was watching. Over the next week, she noticed more small things. A familiar car parked across the street when she went to the store. The same waiter at the cafe near her school who always brought her coffee before she ordered. Once, she even thought she saw one of the men from the club near the bus stop, pretending to read a newspaper. She wasn't being followed to be harmed. She could sense that. It felt more like she was being guarded, protected maybe, but it wasn't the kind of protection she had asked for. One afternoon, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You shouldn't take the bus this late. Her heart skipped. She looked around, but the street was quiet. She typed back quickly, "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly. "Someone who doesn't want you walking home alone." She didn't answer. She put the phone away and kept walking, her pulse racing. A few minutes later, another car, black of course, slowed beside her. The window rolled down just enough for her to see the driver. It was one of the men from the club, the same one who had invited her to Luca's table that night. He spoke gently, with a tone that was more respectful than commanding. "Miss, the boss wants to make sure you get home safely, please." She hesitated, standing frozen on the sidewalk. People passed by without noticing anything unusual. To them, it probably looked like a friend offering her a ride. "I can take care of myself," she said quietly. "I know," the man replied, "but he'll worry if you don't." That word, worry, stuck with her. She wasn't used to anyone worrying about her, especially not someone she had met once. Against her better judgment, she got in the car. The ride was silent. The driver didn't speak, didn't look at her. When they reached her building, he opened the door and handed her another note. "He'd like to see you again. Tomorrow night." Same place, she didn't reply. She just nodded slightly and went inside. But once the door closed behind her, she leaned against it, her thoughts spinning. Why was she even considering it? She should ignore him, stay away from all of this. Yet curiosity was a stubborn thing. The next night, she stood in front of her closet, debating. She told herself she was only going because she wanted to tell him to stop, to leave her alone. That was all. But she still spent too long deciding what to wear. She chose a simple dress again, something soft, nothing too bold. When she arrived at Club Nero, the same guard was at the door. He recognized her instantly and stepped aside without a word. Inside, the same energy pulsed through the air, but this time she didn't feel like a stranger. The bartender smiled faintly when he saw her. "He's expecting you," he said quietly. Her heart beat faster as she made her way to the same corner table. Luca sat there as calm as before, a glass in front of him, the faint glow of a cigarette fading between his fingers. When he saw her, he stood, that same unreadable expression on his face. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure either," she replied. He smiled slightly, motioning for her to sit. "You got my note, I hope?" "I did," she said. "You really didn't have to send anyone to follow me." He leaned back in his chair. "You walk through this city alone at night. You have no idea how many eyes see you. That doesn't give you the right to watch me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You're right," he said softly. But I couldn't help it. There was a long pause. The air between them felt heavier now, but not uncomfortable. She realized he wasn't used to being questioned. People probably did what he wanted without ever saying no, yet he didn't seem angry. If anything, he seemed curious. "You're different," he said finally. "Most people avoid me. You look me in the eye." "Maybe that's because I don't know who you really are," she said. "Maybe," he replied. Or maybe you just don't scare easily. She didn't answer. She looked around the room instead at the people laughing, drinking, pretending not to stare at him. He followed her gaze. Everyone here owes me something, he said. Money, loyalty, sometimes their silence. That's how this world works. She turned back to him. And what do you want from me? He smiled faintly. Nothing you're not willing to give. The way he said it made her heart race. Not because it sounded romantic, it didn't, but because it felt honest. He didn't speak like someone who needed to impress her. He spoke like someone who already knew what power he had. They talked for a long time. About simple things at first. The city, art, food, travel. Then about loneliness, ambition, what it means to trust people. She found herself surprised at how easy it was to talk to him. He listened carefully, never interrupting, never rushing her words. When she mentioned her art, his expression softened. Show me sometime, he said quietly. I'd like to see how you see the world. She laughed nervously. You probably wouldn't like it. It's messy. Good, he said. So am I. That line stayed with her long after the night ended. When she finally stood to leave, he didn't stop her this time. He simply nodded to his driver, who was already waiting. Will I see you again? He asked. She hesitated. I don't know. He smiled, almost sadly. You will, he said. The ride home was silent again. This time she didn't feel nervous and just thoughtful. When she reached her door, she half expected to find another note, another gift. But there was nothing. Only the quiet hum of the street outside. For the first time in days, she slept peacefully. But in the morning, she found a small envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a photograph, a picture of one of her paintings, the one she had left in her studio, still unfinished. On the back, in the same familiar handwriting, were 3 words, "Don't stop now." She stared at it for a long time, trying to understand what she was feeling. Fear, yes, but also something else. Something harder to name. Maybe he was right. Maybe she didn't scare easily. And maybe that was the very thing that would pull her deeper into his world. The following week passed quietly, at least on the surface. She went to her classes, spent hours at her studio, and tried to focus on her art. But no matter what she did, he was there, in her thoughts, in her dreams, even in the way she started noticing the world differently. She would catch herself painting darker shades, softer shadows, faces that reminded her of him. It wasn't intentional, but it happened anyway. There was something about the way he had looked at her that night, as if he could see through every layer she tried to hide. Every few days, another small gesture would appear, never too much, but just enough to remind her that he hadn't forgotten her. A book left at her doorstep with a simple note. You'd like this one. A cup of her favorite coffee already paid for at the cafe she visited. Once, even a stray cat she'd been feeding was suddenly wearing a new collar, with a tiny silver tag engraved with her initials. She didn't know whether to be touched or unsettled. Maybe both. One afternoon, while she was finishing a painting in her studio, there was a knock on the door. She opened it to find the same man who had driven her home from the club before. He gave a polite nod. The boss would like to invite you to dinner, he said. She frowned slightly. Tonight? If possible, he replied. She hesitated. Is this really a request or an order? The man smiled a little. He doesn't give orders to you, miss. He just asks. She didn't answer right away. She looked at her half-finished painting, soft blues and deep grays, and then back at the man. Tell him I'll think about it, she said. When he left, she sat for a long time staring at her work. She knew she shouldn't go. The smart thing would be to stay away. But curiosity was stronger than reason. She wanted to understand him, this man who lived between charm and danger, who could make the city move with a word yet spoke to her like an old friend. That night, she stood in front of the mirror again, just like that first evening. She chose a simple dress, soft cream-colored fabric that made her look calm even though her heart wasn't. When she stepped outside, a car was already waiting. The driver opened the door without a word. The ride was quiet again, the city lights reflecting against the windows as they moved through the narrow streets. But this time, they didn't head toward the club. The car turned down smaller roads away from the noise and toward the sea. They stopped in front of a large villa overlooking the water. It wasn't the kind of place that showed off wealth. It was elegant in a quiet, timeless way. The gates opened slowly, and as the car rolled up the driveway, she could hear faint music coming from inside. When the door opened, he was already waiting for her. He wasn't wearing a suit this time. Just a black shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, no tie. He looked more relaxed, but still carried that same quiet power. "You came," he said softly. "I wasn't sure I would," she admitted. He smiled faintly. "But you did. Come, let me show you something." He led her through the house, past tall windows that framed the ocean below. The sunset painted everything gold and pink, and for a moment, the whole world seemed calm. They walked out to the terrace, where a small table was set with dinner for two. Nothing extravagant, just fresh pasta, bread, and a bottle of wine. It felt almost normal, which somehow made it more strange. "I wanted to thank you," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "For what?" she asked. "For not being afraid to come back?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe I should be." "Maybe," he said. "But I'm glad you're not." For a while, they just talked. He asked about her art again, her family, her dreams. She learned small things about him, too. How he had grown up in Naples, how he loved the sea because it was the only thing he couldn't control. There was a calmness in his voice that she hadn't expected, a kind of honesty that didn't match the stories people whispered about him. At one point, she looked around and said quietly, "You live here alone?" He nodded. "Always have." "This place is quiet, peaceful." She tilted her head. "It feels lonely." He looked at her for a moment, then said, "It is." There was a silence between them that didn't feel uncomfortable. The sound of the waves filled it. After dinner, he walked her to the balcony where the sea stretched endlessly into the night. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and jasmine. He stood beside her, not too close, not too far. "You have a habit of appearing in my life without asking," she said quietly. He smiled slightly. "And you have a habit of letting me." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "That's not fair." "Nothing about me is," he replied. She turned to look at him, trying to read his expression. "What do you want from me, really?" He didn't answer right away. He looked out at the sea, his eyes thoughtful. "I want to understand why you walked into my world without fear," he said finally. "Everyone avoids me, even people who pretend not to. But you—" He paused, then added, "You walked into my club like you belonged there." "I didn't belong there," she said. "Maybe not," he replied. But for the first time it felt like someone did. His honesty startled her. There was no arrogance in his voice, no demand. Just a quiet truth. "I don't know what you think this is," she said gently, "but I can't be part of whatever life you live." "I'm not asking you to be," he said. "Just don't disappear." It was strange hearing someone like him sound uncertain. For all his confidence, there was a trace of something human beneath it. Loneliness, maybe, or longing. She didn't promise anything, but she didn't walk away either. The night went on quietly. They spoke about simple things again, about books, about the city's hidden places. When it was time to leave, he walked her to the car himself. As she opened the door, he said, "If you ever feel unsafe, call this number." He handed her a small card with no name on it, just a phone number written neatly. "I don't even have your number," she said, half smiling. "You don't need it," he replied. "If I need to find you, I will." She rolled her eyes lightly, but there was warmth behind her smile. "That sounds like a threat." "It's a promise," he said simply. The car drove her home, and once again, she stood outside her building under the quiet glow of the streetlight, wondering what she had gotten herself into. Over the next few days, she thought of him more than she wanted to. It wasn't just attraction, it was curiosity, fascination, confusion. He was everything she shouldn't want to be near, and yet he had a way of making her feel seen. One afternoon, while she was cleaning her brushes, her phone buzzed. It was an image, no text, just a photo. It was of her latest painting, finished. But she hadn't shown it to anyone. She stared at it, realizing what it meant. He had been there. Then came the message. "You finally finished it." "It's beautiful." Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know how to reply or if she even should, but she typed anyway. "You shouldn't have been there." The reply came after a pause. "Maybe not, but I told you I protect what's mine." She stared at those words for a long time. He didn't mean them like an owner would. It sounded more like someone who had decided to care in his own broken way. That night she couldn't sleep. The city felt quieter than usual, almost too still. She stood by her window looking out at the lights, and for the first time she realized something important. He wasn't just someone she had met by accident. He was a choice she kept making. And deep down, she knew that every time she said yes, every time she didn't walk away, she was stepping a little further into his world. She didn't know where it would lead, but she also knew one thing for sure. It was too late to pretend she didn't care. The next few weeks felt strange, almost unreal. Life went on as usual. Classes, painting, quiet mornings at her favorite cafe. Yet everything had changed. Every corner of the city now carried a shadow of him. Sometimes she thought she saw his men from a distance, but they never spoke to her. They just seemed to appear and then fade away again, like ghosts that existed only to make sure she was safe. At first it bothered her. She didn't like the idea of being watched, but slowly the feeling turned into something else. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something she couldn't name, a sense of being looked after even when she didn't want to admit it. She told herself she could stop seeing him whenever she wanted, that she still had control, but deep down she wasn't sure that was true anymore. One evening, she was working late at her studio when her phone buzzed. It was a message from him. "Look outside." She frowned, confused. She stood up, walked to the window, and saw a car parked across the street. The door opened and he stepped out. Calm, collected, dressed simply but with the quiet confidence that always surrounded him. She hadn't expected to see him there. He rarely showed up without warning. She hurried down the stairs, half anxious, half curious. When she reached the street, he was leaning against the car, his hands in his pockets. "You work too hard," he said. She smiled slightly. "Some people might say the same about you." "Maybe," he said. "But I wanted to see where you disappear to every day." She crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. "You already knew where I worked." "I knew the address," he said, "but not the place." He looked past her through the large glass window into her studio. Canvases leaned against every wall. Colors splashed across the floor. There was something soft in his expression. Admiration, maybe even pride. "You paint the way I run my business," he said after a moment. No hesitation. Just instinct, she laughed quietly. "That's not always a good thing. It is when you know what you want." His words hung in the air between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. She looked away, unsure how to respond. He changed the subject before she could. "Come with me," he said. "Where?" "Somewhere different," he replied. "You need air. You've been locked in here too long." She hesitated. "Is this another one of your surprises?" "Maybe," he said with a small smile. "But I promise you'll like this one." Something about the way he said it made her trust him. So she locked her studio and followed him to the car. They drove for a while, leaving the noise of the city behind. The streets grew narrower, quieter, until they reached the edge of the sea. The wind was cool and the waves crashed softly against the rocks. He parked near an old lighthouse. It wasn't working anymore. Just an empty tower that had seen better days. The sky was beginning to darken, painted in soft orange and violet. "This was my father's favorite place," he said quietly. "He used to bring me here when I was a kid." She turned to look at him. "He must have loved the view." "He did," he said. "He used to say the sea never lies. It shows you everything if you're patient enough to watch." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the waves. The wind tugged at her hair and she shivered slightly. Without saying a word, he took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "You don't have to do that," she said softly. "I know," he replied. The gesture was simple, but it meant more than words. After a few minutes, she spoke again. "You're different when you're not surrounded by people." "How so?" "You seem real," she said. "Not the man everyone whispers about." He smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "That man keeps people safe. Sometimes that means they have to fear him." "Do you like that?" she asked. He looked at her for a long time before answering. "No," he said. "But it works." She didn't push further. Some questions didn't need answers. They sat on a low stone wall overlooking the sea. The air smelled of salt and rain. For a long time, neither spoke. She could feel the weight of his thoughts, though she didn't know what they were. Finally, he said, "You've made my world complicated." She looked at him, surprised. "I didn't mean to." "I know," he said. "That's why it happened." He turned to face her fully now, his voice quieter. "I'm not a good man. I've done things you wouldn't understand. But when I'm around you, I remember what normal feels like. What peace feels like." She didn't know what to say. Her chest felt tight, her heart unsure if it wanted to break or race. "I don't want to change you," he continued. "I just don't want you to be afraid of me." "I'm not," she said honestly. "But I am afraid of what this could become." He nodded slowly as if he understood completely. "So am I." The wind picked up, carrying their words away into the darkening sky. When he drove her home later that night, neither said much. The silence wasn't awkward. It was filled with unspoken things, the kind of silence that means both people are thinking the same thought, but don't know how to say it. At her door, he stopped. "You should lock your windows," he said quietly. "Why?" "There are people who'd like to hurt me, and some might think hurting you would hurt me more." She frowned, worry crossing her face. "Has something happened?" He shook his head. "Not yet, but the city changes fast. Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," she said softly. He gave a short nod, then stepped back. "Good night," he said. "Good night," she whispered. But even after he left, she couldn't shake the heaviness of his words. She locked her windows that night, just like he said. The next few days were tense. She noticed more unfamiliar faces around the neighborhood. One evening, she returned home to find the lights in her apartment flickering even though she hadn't left them on. It made her uneasy, but she told herself not to panic. Then one night she received a call from an unknown number. "Don't go out tomorrow," the voice said. It was one of his men. "Just stay home." Before she could ask why, the line went dead. The next morning, the city was unusually quiet. Sirens echoed in the distance, but no one seemed to know what had happened. She turned on the news, but there was nothing. Only whispers around the neighborhood. By afternoon, she heard a knock at her door. When she opened it, one of his men stood there. His face was serious. "He asked me to check on you," he said. "You're safe now." "Safe from what?" she asked. He hesitated. "You don't need to worry. He's handling it." That night, she sat by the window staring out at the city lights, wondering where he was and what he was doing. She didn't know why she cared so much, but she did. A few hours later, her phone buzzed with a message. "It's over. You're safe. Get some rest." She stared at the screen, unsure whether to feel relief or fear. Whatever he was involved in, it was getting closer to her world now. And yet, even with all the uncertainty, she couldn't imagine walking away. The next day, he showed up at her studio again. There was no smile this time. He looked tired, his eyes darker than usual. "I told you my world was dangerous," he said quietly. She nodded. "You didn't have to protect me." "Yes, I did," he replied. "You don't understand how much it matters that you're safe." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch light but steady. "I know this isn't fair to you. You didn't ask for any of it, but I can't let anyone hurt you." She looked up at him, her voice soft. "And what happens if staying close to you is what puts me in danger?" He didn't answer. He just looked at her for a long time, as if searching for words that didn't exist. Then he said quietly, "Then I'll have to find a way to keep you safe, even from me." Her heart ached at those words. She didn't know whether to believe him or fear what they meant. As he turned to leave, she called after him, "Luca?" He stopped and looked back. "Be careful," she said. For the first time, he smiled. Small, tired, but real. "Always," he said. And when he was gone, she realized something she had been trying not to admit. She wasn't just part of his world anymore. He had become part of hers. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between them grew heavier. She hadn't seen him since that last night at her studio. He had disappeared again, just like before, leaving behind only questions. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart jumped, hoping it was him. But it never was. She told herself she needed to move on. Life couldn't stop for someone who might never come back. She tried to lose herself in her art, but even the colors on her canvas looked dull now. Every painting felt unfinished, like something was missing. Or someone. Her friends noticed the change. "You've been quiet lately," one of them said one afternoon. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she lied. But she wasn't. The truth was, she missed him. Not the powerful man everyone feared, but the version of him she had seen by the sea. The one who talked about his father and the lighthouse. The one who had looked at her like she was the only part of his life untouched by shadows. One rainy evening, she was closing up her studio when she noticed something unusual. A small envelope had been slipped under her door. There was no name on it, just a seal. One she recognized instantly. Her heart raced as she tore it open. Inside was a single piece of paper with a few words written in his handwriting. Meet me where the sea never lies. She didn't need to think twice. The rain fell harder as she drove out of the city. The roads were slick and quiet, the headlights cutting through the mist. When she reached the lighthouse, she saw a black car parked near the cliff. His car. He was standing by the edge, his coat whipping in the wind. For a moment she just watched him from a distance. He looked the same and yet different, quieter, older somehow. When he turned and saw her, a small smile crossed his face. You came. You asked me to, she said softly. I wasn't sure you would. She stepped closer. I almost didn't. He nodded slowly, his eyes tracing the horizon. I've been gone too long, he said. Things got worse before they got better. But it's over now. She studied his face carefully. You mean, you're safe? As safe as I'll ever be, he said with a tired smile. But it came with a price. She waited, sensing there was more. I had to walk away from everything, he continued. The business, the power, the name, all of it. It's not mine anymore. I gave it up, her eyes widened. You just left? It wasn't easy, he said. But I realized that keeping it meant losing every piece of myself that was still good. And I couldn't do that anymore. She didn't know what to say. The man who once ruled everything was now standing in front of her, stripped of it all. And somehow he looked freer. He looked down at her, his voice softer. You were right, you know. Being close to me was dangerous. I couldn't stay away before because I thought I could protect you. But I was wrong. The only way to keep you safe was to disappear. Her heart ached at his words. You think leaving me made me safe? It just made me empty. He took a slow breath as if her words had hit harder than he expected. I know, and that's why I came back. Not to pull you into my world again, but to see if maybe after everything, there's still a place for me in yours. The wind howled around them, carrying the smell of salt and rain. She looked at him, her voice trembling. You can't just walk in and expect things to be the same. I don't, he said. I just needed to see you, to say I'm sorry, for all of it, the danger, the fear, the silence. Her eyes burned with tears she hadn't meant to shed. You don't get it, she whispered. I wasn't afraid because of what you were. I was afraid because I didn't know what losing you would do to me. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the waves filled the silence between them. Finally, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. I don't have much left to offer, he said quietly. But this belonged to my mother. She used to say it brought her luck. He opened it, revealing a small silver pendant, simple, worn, and beautiful in its own way. I want you to have it, he said, not as a promise, just as a reminder that even in the darkest places there's something worth holding on to. Her hands trembled as she took it. You don't have to do this. I know, he said. But I want to. She stared at the pendant, then at him. What will you do now? He shrugged lightly. Start over, I guess. Somewhere quiet. I don't know where yet. Maybe by the sea, somewhere no one knows my name. She smiled faintly. You think you can just become someone else? Maybe not, he admitted. But I can try to become someone better. The rain softened, turning into a mist that wrapped around them. She stepped closer until she was only a few feet away. And what if I told you I still see the good in you, even after everything? He looked at her then, really looked, his eyes filled with something raw and unguarded. Then I'd say you're the only one who ever did. They stood there for a while, neither moving, both caught between what was and what could be. Finally, she broke the silence. You don't have to start over alone. He blinked as if unsure he had heard her right. What are you saying? I'm saying, she said slowly, that maybe we both deserve a new beginning. You've been running from your past and I've been waiting for a future that made sense. Maybe this is it. He took a step closer, searching her face for any sign of doubt. Are you sure? No, she said honestly. But maybe that's what makes it real. A small laugh escaped him, the first genuine one she'd heard from him in a long time. You always surprise me. Good, she said softly. Someone has to. The wind quieted, and for the first time in months there was peace in the air. He reached out, brushing his fingers against her cheek. I don't know what comes next, he said. But if you'll have me, I'll do everything I can to make it right. She placed her hand over his. Then stop talking and start living. He smiled, a small, real smile that reached his eyes. Deal. They stayed by the lighthouse until the sky began to lighten. The storm had passed and the sea was calm again, quiet, endless, and true. As the first light of morning touched the water, she turned to him. Do you still believe the sea never lies? He looked out at the horizon. I do, he said. And right now it's telling me something. What's that? That maybe, this time I found something worth keeping. She smiled, her hand still in his. Then let's not lose it. He nodded slowly, and for the first time, there was no fear in his eyes, only hope. They stood there together, two people who had walked through fire and found something real on the other side. The world around them was still uncertain, still imperfect, but somehow that made it even more beautiful. Later that morning, they left the lighthouse behind. The city was waiting, full of noise and stories that didn't belong to them anymore. They didn't need promises or grand gestures, just a quiet understanding that after everything, they had chosen each other. As the car disappeared down the coastal road, the sea glimmered under the rising sun, calm and endless, as if it had witnessed everything and finally approved. And somewhere between the crashing waves and the open sky, their story, once born in chaos, found its peace.